and welcome to yet another edition of your weekly international current affairs program, Globe Watch from the Cameroon Radio Television with me, Charles Obuni, Ed from the Hilton Hotel here in Yaoundé, Cameroon. Next May 29, the new president of the African Development Bank will be chosen, and it is one of the most coveted posts on the continent to drive an economy which is facing many challenges and with a green light, of course, delivered by the momentous African Continental Free Trade Area. The echoes from Washington and Asian markets will equally shape how the new management will look like, since there are some shareholders from those areas who are part of the African Development Bank Group. My guest today on the program is one of the candidates running for its presidency. Samuel Maimbo, thank you very much indeed for being guest on our program.
Thank you for having me. Delighted to be here in Cameroon.
I understand that you are in Cameroon on your continental tour to canvass for support as the next president of the African Development Bank. Why should member countries back your candidacy?
Thank you very much for having me. And indeed, I have traveled the length and breadth of our beautiful continent discussing my vision for the African Development Bank, making it clear that today Africa sits at a crossroads. On one hand, we've got everything that we need to claim the next century. On the other hand, we are also living in an environment that has changed globally. You need a president who understands the plumbing of development, who has more than 30 years of experience trying his best to make finance work for Africa. I feel I'm ready. I've had the endorsement from regional blocs. I'm still traveling because I'm not taking that support for granted, meeting with people and making the case one handshake at a time, one country at a time.
East Africa, from where you come, of course, has one of the best success stories of regional economic communities on the continent, just like the SADC area, which has equally backed you. And when I read your policy statement, one of the key areas of your focus is regional integration. Why have you chosen that as your #1 priority?
For two simple reasons. Firstly, if whatever we produce, if we're not trading with each other, it's losing value or it's just going to be lost. But trade and regional integration is the quickest way in which we can grow our economies collectively at a pace and scale that we need to make a difference on our continent. Think about this. Right now, we're spending $50 billion importing food from outside the continent. That's literally taking money from Africa and shipping it elsewhere. Regional integration allows us the opportunity to take coffee, to buy coffee from Kenya or Ethiopia. Each time we do that, we're investing in Kenya and Ethiopia's economy. We want the Kenyans and Ethiopians to be buying cocoa from here, from this region, so that they invest in each other. We must bring down that import bill because, keep in mind, depending on aid to develop this continent is not going to work. You've read the news. That money isn't coming. We've got to find sources of growth right here on our continent.
You used an expression and a word. You have the experience to leverage the next frontier of the African Development Bank. You were a senior official at the World Bank and Price Copper, which is one of the biggest private sector elements in Africa and even in the world. How unique is your experience to make the change needed at the African Development Bank? Because other candidates will equally tell you that they have the experience. I'm talking about Mahamat Abatolis, who was the governor of Beak, my former guest, and I can name the others.
Sure, look, I'm proudest of the experience, not as a senior official alone, but also as a young economist working on this continent on operational projects. I have lived in Mozambique. I have worked the breadth of this continent, working on payment systems and licensing legislation that makes it possible for West African banks to go to Southern Africa and Southern African banks to go to East Africa. I have worked in some of the most difficult places, so that as I've risen in the institution to senior positions of leadership, I've got the operational experience. The second set of experiences as is on the financing side. As Vice President for Budget and Strategic Planning, I work with my colleagues to make sure that we deal with the most efficient and effective way to source financing, to allocate it, and make sure that it's being productive every single day. As director for IDA, I've been involved in raising billions for development purposes.
Development Association. IDA.
International Development Association.
Okay.
And being able to do it in the midst of COVID, when your largest shareholders are literally losing lives, when you advance that process, you develop fundraising and financing skills that this continent needs. Finally, let's not kid ourselves. Development is politics. It's a political process. You have to have the senior level experience of negotiating very difficult environments. The world's geopolitics have changed significantly. As Chief of Staff to 2 World Bank presidents and my current role, being able to sit at the table where you are debating second and third best options because you do not have the resources available, that's the experience the African Development Bank needs today.
Your roles, of course, at the World Bank, as you indicated, Chief of Staff, sitting with the highest policymakers in the world, and one of the key successes, you were part of the team for the resource mobilization of roughly 91 or 93 billion dollars during the COVID period to leverage. How do you intend to use your resource mobilization to inject new cash in financing agriculture on the continent? I was just reading documents this morning, the current ADB president, Adesina, saying that they are injecting roughly 500 million to open a space of roughly 10 billion for income to come on the continent.
So you raised 2 separate but related issues, financing and agriculture. When it comes to financing, keep in mind that development aid has actually been falling from as far back as 2015. Yeah. We managed to achieve these record levels by financial innovation, by going to markets, by partnering with others. And it's that same sense of spirit that I want to bring to the African Development Bank. There are many other African financial institutions on the continent. I will partner with each one of them. There are other multilateral development banks, Afri-Exim Bank, ATI, and others. Even the World Bank's last replenishment of 100 billion, I want to see as much of that money working right here in Africa. So scaling up financing is not an option, it's a must do. When it comes to agriculture, I grew up on a farm. I always say that if I retire from development, you will find me on a farm somewhere else, right? But when you are serious about agricultural transformation, don't start with the money. Start with the markets. Where are the markets for our agricultural products? And this is where making the Continental Free Trade Agreement work is absolutely essential for agriculture. Because you cannot produce tomatoes and think you're going to be successful if you're going to be selling them to India. Okay. It's got to be your neighbors. So start with building the markets. Okay. The second thing is go to productivity. Where is the productivity? We've got 5% of our arable land under irrigation, 40% in Asia. Where is the planning for increasing the irrigation systems? Think about productivity, our cereals. The same acreage gives you 1.2 tons. In Asia and everywhere else, it gives you 3.4. We've got two countries that have got capacity to provide fertilizer to the continent. Right now, the majority of that fertilizer is going to Brazil, right? Those are the structural issues we must address before we even talk about a single dollar. You get the political commitment, you get the structures right. You start thinking about linkages to universities to enhance your productivity. You fix the markets, you fix the plumbing, and then you find that dollar bill. And then you immediately accept that that dollar bill is not going to come from the public sector alone. Where's the private money coming from? Where is the PPP structures that come in agriculture? And the one thing that disincentivizes private sector financing is consistency of public policy. That's where we need to go.
I just mentioned one of your key priorities, which is regional integration. Apart from that, what are the other key messages you are driving in and you are sending across as areas of priority for your mandate if elected?
I'm glad you started with regional integration because it's a central part of my vision. But regional integration for what? For our traditional products like agriculture, which we've just discussed, but also for our new products and new creative sectors, the films, the music, the arts, the creative industry. There is so much between agriculture.
To generate roughly $23 billion in the years to come for the African economy.
That is absolutely. And even today, Nigeria is generating 600 million from Nollywood. South Africa is generating 300 million from esports. No physical infrastructure.
Okay.
So the opportunities between the creative industry and our traditional agri are immense. So that's the layer where in the last 6 months I've gone sector by sector discussing policy options that we can accelerate. You build your industries, you strengthen your regional integration and trade. Underlying that, or rather the foundation of all of that, are two key pillars, infrastructure and energy. Right now, the minute any product comes off a shop floor, its costs go up 30 to 40% because of the quality of infrastructure. Okay. We have to fix that. In terms of energy, you cannot grow an economy in the dark. So you have just really summarized the key elements of what this vision is. It's accepting we've got work to do. It is immediately sidestepping all of the stuff that is easy to do and asking the hard questions about implementation.
You talked about energy. Roughly 650 million of the roughly 1.5 billion people on the continent today suffer from energy poverty. And recently, in East Africa, development partners meet in what they call Mission to reach 100 million. That is to reduce the number, to increase people who can have access to energy. What kind of energy are you interested in the era of green energy, fossil fuels? The debate is very complicated. Where do you stand on energy?
My stance is actually very simple. It's not complicated. It's complicated for us who have the luxury of working in buildings that have electricity. Okay. For the 600 million people who don't have electricity, their request is simple: give us the electricity we need. The good news is that when you add up the hydropower, the solar energy, you look at all of the sources of energy on the continent, we not only have the capacity to power the entire continent, we've got capacity to export, but we have work to do. And a primary goal for me is making sure that the regional power pools that we have in North Africa, in East Africa, Southern Africa, and even here in West Africa are connected, so that when you have a drought in one region, you can import power. Whatever problem you have, and maybe this comes from growing up on a farm, you start with the market. Where is the market? And how can I get to the market? And then you make your investment. The market is continent-wide. Right now, it is in regional pools. To make access easier, invest in, if the African Development Bank does nothing else over the next 5 years, but invest in creating a single market, we will double the number of people who will have access to energy. And this conversation is important because as much as I love M300, and as much as I am proud of both the African Development Bank and the World Bank for joining hands, the reality is, if we continue at this pace and the continent is really growing significantly, if we get the growth right, the investment in regional integration right, we do run the real risk that by 2030, those numbers are still the same, right? That's the real fear that I have.
In a moment, the interview will come to an end, but let us unpack maybe 3 issues together.
Sure.
One, you claim you want a results-driven and based African Development Bank.
Correct.
To build on the momentum of the current presidency. you intend to decentralize the governance structures and make it more closer to the people. But in that basket, there is a portion of what they call small and medium-sized enterprises,
Correct,
which need to be industrialized on the continent. And in Africa south of the Sahara today, except my statistics betray me, there are roughly 44 million of them.
Correct.
What are you going to do for that middle class of the African economic mantle?
You've asked highly relevant questions for the future of the African Development Bank and the continent. When it comes to the African Development Bank and its governance structures and its processes and systems and its degree of decentralization, I will be the first one to recognize that we have had a number of presidents come and go at the African Development Bank. My responsibility is to build on what I find, build on the fact that the current president has raised the discussion about Africa globally. I take that and talk about effective implementation. And this is where the idea of decentralization, not just decentralizing people, it's decentralizing functions and decision making so that we can be faster in implementation. To give you an example, we need to make it easier for the private sector to come to the African Development Bank and have a conversation about making investments in some strategic areas, infrastructure, energy, and the rest. The African Development Bank must be in a position to be a syndicator and facilitator in chief. You raised the question of SMEs, right? Part of responsible development is understanding what you can and what you cannot do. When it comes to SMEs, the African Development Bank is a large institution. The most effective way of reaching a large number of SMEs is through partnerships.
Okay.
Partnerships with other financial institutions who have the relationship in all of these different countries. I will partner with Shelter Afrique. I'll partner with the African Import-Export Bank.
Shelter Afrique, which has to do with developing housing infrastructure on the continent.
Absolutely. So it's those partnerships that will extend the reach. A mandate of 5 years sounds long, but it's not a long time.
Okay.
Right? I don't have the luxury of trying to come up with something clever simply because I want to put the badge of the African Development Bank. From day one, the first meeting I will call, and I've repeated this and I will continue to repeat this, is meeting with the CEOs of all of the African financial institutions. Together, if they will welcome it, individually, if I can. There is no room on this continent for competition. There's no room for duplication. We all have a single mandate to grow this continent, and I will do that in partnership with others.
Let us take something which is very central in all African discussion today, the African Continental Free Trade Area, already operational in its pilot phase, yes, with 7 or 8 countries, already paint by plus 44 African countries, 8 years after. What do you intend to do with the African Continental Free Trade Area for it to live to more than the expected 30 million Africans out of poverty within a decade?
So the first thing I will
What have you seen is a loophole that you would like to close the gap?
Okay. First of all, I commend everybody who has been involved in creating the world's largest free trade area. It is not easy, and the political process that has gone through, that has predecessors me, is something that we should all be proud of.
Okay.
To get it done, we need to do deals, many more deals. The time for studies is done. We've got structures that have been set up, and the secretariat responsible for this will have 150% support from me. And I'll give you a couple of examples. We have observatories that have been set up that are championing some pilots between countries. We have to multiply the number of pilots so that we are spreading the implementation. We've got to support those observatories with data and financing that allows them to give them real-time data. A businessman who is established in Cameroon is not going to wait for a report to decide where he wants to go. We've got to give him an app that tells him the volumes of coffee crossing borders. He wants to jump in today.
Okay.
Right? That's what I want to do. So if you ask me what's missing, it's not the commitment, right? It is the operationalization of trade. It's doing deals and facilitating deals. It's negotiating value rather than documents. If you take two countries and give them two legal documents and you put two lawyers, they will be talking for a long time. And if they're successful, they might reduce that document from 50 pages to 30 pages.
Okay.
You've got to get the finance people in the room to compute the value of slashing and reducing tariffs and demonstrating that if you reduce your tariffs by 50% today, not tomorrow, not next week, this is the revenue you will get. Then you begin to break down the borders much faster than we currently are doing.
One but last question. Let's talk about the young people, for whom possibly your mandate is of greatest concern. About 450 million of them exist in the continent. Nearly 50 million of them enter the job market each year, of the roughly 500 million people employed on the continent. This is a tech-savvy generation. Is using technology to solve the many problems Africa is going through part of your agenda at the African Development Bank?
When you said this is the last question, I thought you were going to ask me about football. I come from Zambia and I've long admired Cameroon and the soccer that we played together. But I will use the question about youth to come back to football. The young people on this continent are fascinating. As part of this campaign, I've traveled...
Their greatest Cameroonian fans in East Africa is either Samuel Eto'o or Andre Onana. You can go ahead.
Absolutely, absolutely. And when it comes to Zambia, it's Kalusha Bwalia. So
absolutely, we are all aware of that.
We're all in good hands.
Yeah.
But the reality is, look, the people I've been meeting on this campaign are fascinating. And as a deliberate effort, whenever I visit a country, I try and find young people who are involved in the creative arts or they're involved in business. I spend 2 to 3 hours just listening to them. And in every single situation, I've been blown away by what they're doing. With each other, with technology, the innovations they have to cross borders faster. They're amazing. And I think the one thing that I am committed to doing at the African Development Bank is having a youth council that gives them a platform to participate in the development of our continent with a direct ear to the president and the leadership of the institution. I don't want to second guess them. There are certain things that we can do really well, because getting young people involved in development is not a one-off initiative. It's a long-term commitment. It starts with education, it starts with health. It's about making sure that our institutions, our top-notch universities, I want to make sure that the university here has internships with every African Development Bank office across the continent. Because what often is missing for our young people is not that they don't have the ideas, but they haven't been exposed to the language of development. So if I can take the best economist or the best health scientist and say every year we will take 5 for 3 months, come into the African Development Bank, you do that every year for the next 5 years, you will have a generation of young people who are not only entrepreneurial in business,
but have been capacitated.
But have the capacity, have the language to give some of us people the advice in a language we understand. And that's the role of the African development. But I'm really optimistic about our young people. They will solve problems that we have been talking about for years and years. They will get to implementation because they're impatient, and I welcome that, and I look forward to working with them directly for the sake of our continent.
Finally, Mr. President, maybe in 40 seconds, of course, you have the support of East Africa, you have the support of Southern Africa, and you are now in Central Africa, canvassing for support. Possibly you'll be going to West Africa to talk to authorities in Nigeria, Senegal, and of course, other competing countries, and why not North Africa, Morocco, Egypt, and the rest. Of the discussions you have been holding outside your comfort zone, do you have a sense that you're on the right path?
Absolutely. One of the things which has been heartwarming is the consensus around the reality of where Africa is today. There is uniformity in that Africa is at a crossroads, that the old cycle of debt and aid is no longer relevant and useful for this continent, and we must get to growth and prosperity. That's the first point where there is consensus. The second point is the conversation has been about the plumbing of the system. How do we get things done? African leaders are tired about being lectured to. In fact, in all of the conversations, as soon as I talk about the vision and what needs to be done, they come up with a whole list of things where we are fully aligned immediately. Okay. Right? And then comes the issue of, can I get your vote or not? Okay. Right? Now, that process, I've been very candid with all of the countries that I have met. The most important thing for me is two things. On the day that you vote, I want to make sure that you fully understand where I stand and the skills I have. The second thing, when you vote, vote for the candidate who will do the most good for this continent. If you can promise me those two things, then I will sleep well at night, knowing that I did everything I possibly could do to give Africa, to give ourselves a chance to leave this continent better for our children and grandchildren.
And with that, we conclude the interview with an element of optimism. And while
Absolutely.
Waiting for May 29, we can only say good luck. Samuel Maimbo, thank you very much indeed for being guest on my program.
Thank you very much. I really appreciated your time.
You are welcome.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, we have had people who later became presidents in their various countries, and we hope that you will become the next president of the
Thank
African
you very much.
Development
And with that, you have my promise I will come back right here for us to finish this conversation.
Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you.